Hey guys, welcome to Wrestling Daze and welcome to this very special video because we are going to be looking at 10 missed opportunities by Vince McMahon, and you guys seem to be really enjoying these videos, so make sure that you send through your suggestions, because what I'm doing is screenshotting them and saving them as like future video ideas. And that's exactly what Jim Gore did. He sent through his suggestion. He said top 10 missed opportunities by Vince McMahon, and I love it. I love it. Vince obviously is now retired, so it makes sense to do this video now. Look back on everything that happened when Vince took over up until the point he retired. Look at those big missed opportunities. There's definitely a lot of things that just missed out on being in this video, but these are the ones that really came to mind. So let's get to it. Let's start, shall we, with the Nexus. Now, the Nexus were a group of NXT talent from 2010. That was actually the first year that we had NXT. And this was so exciting. They were attacking people, ripping up the ringside area, and just really causing chaos on a scale we had just never seen before. And people were loving it. Fans were loving it. The Nexus were cool. They were doing stuff we just hadn't seen. And it really felt like a massive shift. It really felt like a big change. And really, we have seen a couple of groups since, probably most notably Retribution from the other year, where they were like coming in and like destroying the ringside area. And there was a lot of comparisons to the Nexus. But really, this is, one of the first examples of this kind of scale of destruction by a faction. And as we said, they were so much fun. Crowd loved it. Built up to this match at Summerslam 2010. And this match here is Team WWE taking on the Nexus. And this really is a big pivotal moment because the Nexus needed to win this. They had great momentum. The future was looking bright. They needed to get past Team WWE, and they don't. They lose the match. John Cena is apparently the reason for that. He did not want to put the Nexus over. He has since come out and said he got it wrong. He said he's held his hands up and said he is quite happy to admit when he's wrong, and he was wrong on this one. Because the truth is, they were never the same after this loss. They tried lots of different things, changed leaders, had breakaway factions. There was lots of different things they tried, but it was just never quite the same. This really did feel like the moment that the Nexus kind of faction experiment kind of came to an end. And the opportunity, the potential was absolutely massive. Next up, we've got Hulk Hogan against Ric Flair. Imagine if CM Punk came over to WWE and brought the AEW title with him. That would blow people's minds, and there would be a lot of excitement. And I would imagine a lot of people would want to see CM Punk against Roman Reigns, champion versus champion, who's the real champion, all of that kind of stuff. Well, that is pretty much what happened in 1991, and that is where Ric Flair came over from WCW, and he brought their belt with him. This was controversial, and WWE had to blur the belt out and everything. But Ric Flair came over. He was unhappy with WCW, so he would have come over anyway. But he came over in storyline to confront Hulk Hogan. As soon as he arrives, he's talking about Hulk Hogan, and he's talking about proving that he is the real world's champion. And it's all about that. That is the story. So it seems inevitable that we are going to get Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. Champion versus champion. But it just never happens. Well, it does happen, but in WCW, it never happens in WWE. And so it's a massive missed opportunity because this is a match that people would have loved to have seen. You can see it in WCW, but it just doesn't hit the same. It's not the same as Wrestlemania. And so the reason being that this didn't happen is because they did house shows And apparently on those house shows, the reaction was a bit lukewarm. The crowd were not like crazy about the match and not really crazy about seeing it. And so that sent a message to Vince that the fans just didn't want it. But I don't think that's true. This really is regarded as one of those kind of dream matches that got away. Again, you can see it in WCW, but it's just not the same. It's just not the same. And I think that instead we end up getting Macho Man against Ric Flair, and that is a great match. We get Sid Justice against Hulk Hogan, which is not as great. But this is definitely one that I would have loved to have seen. Another one as well would have been Hulk Hogan against Stone Cold. And in all fairness to Vince, he wanted to do this. Hogan wanted to do this. Stone Cold didn't. Stone Cold didn't think that the match could live up to the hype. And he also, I think, was probably concerned that Hogan was going to get put over. And there was no way that Stone Cold was interested in putting Hulk Hogan over. So there was this is another one that kind of really slipped away, got away from us. But it's such a shame, you know. But it's fortunate that Hogan did come back and was able to have those matches against The Rock in particular. And we saw him face The Undertaker later on in his career. Saw him face Shawn Michaels, although it was a pretty crazy match. But at least we did get to see some of those kind of matchups. So at least he did come back and have some, but there's definitely some that got away. Next up, we've got Sting. If I was to say to you, who is the biggest superstar who never competed for WWE in their prime? Now, some of you might say like a load of Japanese stars. Some of you might come out with some territory names. Some of you might even come out with some like ECW, WCW, maybe even some AEW names. But for me, the biggest to never compete in WWE in their prime was Sting. Sting was massive. Sting was one of the biggest stars of the 90s. Absolutely huge. Whether he was the Crow or Surfer Sting, he was absolutely huge. Multiple-time world champion. And for me, there were so many dream matches in the 90s that we could have seen from Sting. You know, Sting taking on The Undertaker, Sting taking on Triple H. And here you can see he does eventually come to WWE and face Triple H. But by this point, he's in his 50s. He's in his mid-50s. It's not the same. Like, in the 90s, we could have had some incredible Sting matches, Sting moments. And I do believe that Vince tried to reach out to him and tried to make it work, but he couldn't get him. He couldn't get him after WCW went out of business. And in the end, we end up getting him in 2014, 2015. His run is very memorable. I think it has some fantastic moments. I think it also has some disappointments. And maybe the result of this WrestleMania 31 match against Triple H with Triple H winning, I think that was a disappointment. Obviously, the fact he gets injured is a major disappointment. But yeah, I was thinking I'd love to see Sting come back now. I love Sting. And even though you might not get another match out of him, you might do. But even if you can't, I think you can get many great moments. I think he's great for anniversary shows and legend shows and meet and greets and just having as an ambassador. So I would love for him to come back to WWE. I don't know that will ever happen. But, yeah, for me, this will always be one of the biggest missed opportunities. As we said earlier, Sting, Undertaker may be my all-time dream match that we just never got. Next up, WCW. Let's talk about the Invasion. I think when we first started doing this, probably the Invasion will be what most people thought of first. I don't want to spend too long on this because there's been so much talk about it that I feel like most of you are going to know about the Invasion and how it went wrong. But basically, WWE and WCW were going head-to-head. Monday Night Wars, absolutely massive. That was the Attitude Era. You know, both of these sides bringing their all, going head-to-head. And that is really where the Attitude Era, that's what drives the Attitude Era. And so, by the time you get to 2001, WCW is done. It's run out of road and it goes out of business. The plug is pulled, and WWE actually buy them. Vince buys his competition. He buys WCW. He has them in his hands. So you can imagine the excitement. People thinking now that we're going to get this big invasion and all these dream matches, and the hype was real. Sadly, even though Vince had bought WCW, he did not get a lot of the big stars with it. So he didn't get the likes of Sting. He didn't get Hulk Hogan. He didn't get Goldberg. Like, a lot of the big names were not a part of the sale. So it meant that he knew what the fans wanted. They wanted an invasion. He wanted to give them that. But how do you do it when you've only got mid-carders and jobbers? Well, what you have to do is you have to bring in the likes of ECW. You have to take some of your stars and kind of throw them over to this other side. And what we ended up getting really was not so much a WCW invasion, but an alliance invasion, an alliance of ECW, WCW, and even some WWE, kind of all mixed together and trying to use that as the invasion. And it was just not what the fans wanted. You know, not what the fans wanted at all. And the whole thing was just very underwhelming and disappointing and way below people's expectations. It's a hard one to know, well, what could Vince have done? But could he have bought them out of their contracts? Could he have waited a little bit of time before doing an invasion? Like, did he need to do it straight away? Could he have, waited for their contracts and then done it in 2002? You know, just maybe let it settle down. Let it settle down. Just move on with your own stories. Have Vince say that, you know, there's not going to be any WCW. It's dead. That's it. Move on. And then maybe, 6 months, 12 months later, then try and go back and revisit it. But that's not what happens. And instead he tries to work with what he's got, and it's very underwhelming. To kind of put that into perspective, this whole thing really pays off by the time we get to Survivor Series of 2001. And you can see here, this is Team WWE taking on the Alliance. So Team WWE, I mean, you might struggle to know which one is which, actually. You might sit there not quite knowing which is Team WWE and which one is the Alliance, and that's the problem. So Team WWE are on the right because obviously Undertaker, Kane, Big Show had been in WCW, Jericho had been in WCW, The Rock was leading Team WWE, but he has the WCW belt. Over on the left-hand side, you've got Rob Van Dam, who represents ECW. You've got Kurt Angle, who's a WWE superstar. Shane McMahon, who is a McMahon. Granted, he was a part of buying WCW, but he's still a McMahon. And then Stone Cold Steve Austin, who they move over to the Alliance, and he had been in WCW as Stunning Steve Austin. But by this point, he is so WWE that the optics don't look good. That just does not look good. The only person there that I think makes any sense is Booker T. Because he obviously had been, multiple time champion WCW, and had been in Harlem Heat and everything. So, yeah, it's just crazy. Just crazy how circumstance meant that they just could not capitalize on this amazing opportunity to have this invasion storyline. So yeah, that I think will probably go down as the biggest missed opportunity. Next up, we've got Bray and the new face of fear. We're not going to spend too long on this, but for me, Undertaker is done by the time the streak ends. So Undertaker has this amazing career. The streak ends. I think that's when he should have gone. Because I think once the streak is over, there really isn't much for him to stick around for. By this point, he's starting to only do a few shows a year. He's not doing a full-time schedule. So he's just doing attraction matches. And even if he wants to stick around and still do those, that's fine. But I think if you look at the quality of those matches, you can see that his body is starting to fail him. And the quality of the matches, he is starting to deteriorate. And really, I think that WrestleMania 30, even that match is not a great match because he suffers a concussion. But that, for me, is really the moment that the decline, I personally start seeing it. So for me, I think that was the perfect time for him to walk away now that the streak had ended. But the very next year at WrestleMania, he faces Bray Wyatt. And to me, it's a no-brainer that he puts Bray over. There's no streak anymore. And actually, you could argue, even if there was, Bray was a pretty good person to end it. But Bray was the new face of fear. Bray was the new scary character. And it just made sense that at this point, Bray should be the one that gets put over. But it doesn't happen. Undertaker wins. And actually, all we see throughout Bray's career is just this catalogue of opportunities, missed opportunities, that would have really helped him get to the next level. Even if you go to, like, the Fiend character, and you look at the Fiend, we can talk about how he loses to Goldberg. I mean, if he's going to lose, that's fine. But Goldberg, like, just a couple of years ago, and not only that, but also the Hell in a Cell match. Obviously, that got a big backlash, the Hell in a Cell match against Seth Rollins. As well as that, you know, I think being burnt alive, that will divide opinion. But for me, that was just too far. And it just, not in like a scary way, but just in a way that for me, it started to become pointless and silly and not very creative. Not what The Fiend and the Funhouse started out as, which was full of meaning and really interesting. You know, by the end, we're just setting dummies on fire. So I really think that, like, there was lots of missed opportunities, not only with cult leader Bray, but with the Fiend character as well. Next up, we've got ECW. ECW was, you could make an argument that had the rebirth of ECW gone well, there might not be a need for AEW, because there is an audience out there that wants wrestling and mature entertainment. You know, they want the barbed wire, they want blood, they want a little bit of sexiness. And ECW was able to provide all of that. And it was massively popular, but it just could not keep going. And by the time we get into like 2000, 2001, ECW goes out of business. And obviously, as we've just said, they're part of that Invasion storyline. But there is an opportunity to relaunch ECW, because what Vince does is he buys ECW and he buys the rights, the video library, all of that, and he releases a DVD set. And this DVD box set goes crazy. The sales are insane. And as a result, they do a special one-night stand. So they do One Night Stand 2005 and One Night Stand 2006. Two special shows, I think, to just say goodbye, but also maybe to gauge the reaction of, like, how much interest is there? And it's massive. And so what they decide to do is they're going to bring ECW back as a third brand. So you've got Raw, you've got SmackDown, you've got ECW. And so they bring it back, but they bring it back in a WWE way. Not what made it great. Not with the barbed wire and all of that kind of stuff. They bring it back with, like, a zombie, and they bring it back with WWE superstars that just don't fit that ECW mentality. And they do things like putting the belt on Vince. Like, I know this is meant to make people angry and get a reaction, but it's just so far away from what made ECW so special that, you know, by the time we get to 2010, ECW is killed and replaced with NXT. But I think had that have worked, you know, WWE could have had a Raw, SmackDown, like, family content, and then just completely separate from that, they could have had ECW that catered to that more mature person, that older person. And as I said, had that have succeeded and thrived, maybe there would have been no need for AEW. Next up, we've got the Cruiserweight Classic. This is one that I'm a big believer in. You know, I'm a big believer in a belt for those smaller guys, because if you've got Roman and Brock and Karrion Kross and Drew McIntyre at the top of the card, how does a Finn Balor, how does a Rey Mysterio, how does an Owen Hart, how do these amazing wrestlers stand any chance of winning the major titles? How do they get their major moments. You know, Daniel Bryan gets there eventually, but that's only because the fans demand it. Rey Mysterio gets there eventually, but that's only because of Eddie passing and the fans demanding it and really willing Rey to do it for Eddie. So it's kind of, for me, a shame that WWE has never truly got behind a belt for those smaller guys. And I don't like to say smaller guys, smaller wrestlers, because I feel like I do them a disservice. Because Finn Balor's not small. AJ Styles is not small. Owen Hart was not small. It's not a case that they're like small. It's a case that they're just not as big as some of the giants that WWE have. And even if they were on the smaller side, it wouldn't make any difference. This is all about the quality of their work and the skills and, their promo abilities, their charisma, things along those lines. We've said in other videos, some of the most popular athletes out there are Floyd Mayweather, Conor McGregor. These are small guys. They compete in, lightweight divisions. They are low down in the pecking order of rankings. They would be nowhere near heavyweight titles. So in 2016, WWE did the Cruiserweight Classic. This was a tournament where they were going to crown a new Cruiserweight champion, and it was brilliant. The quality of the matches were brilliant. We had people like Zack Sabre Jr., we had people like Kota Ibushi. It was so much fun. And even they went a step further and they started, once we had a division, started to put matches on Raw with purple ropes and purple graphics and everything. And it was really interesting, but flawed. There was a big flaw, and the flaw was star power. There was no star power. Some of the biggest names they were putting in were Neville and Enzo Amore and Austin Aries, who had only been there a couple of minutes. So it really was lacking a Rey Mysterio and some of that top tier star power. It seemed like they were willing to go so far, but they weren't willing to go far enough to actually make this work, to force this to work. Because I feel like they created the division. It had its own show in 205 Live. They were even giving segments of Raw over to it, although I don't know why. Because Intercontinental Belt doesn't get its own segment. The United States Championship doesn't get its own segment. So why was the Cruiserweight division getting its own segment? So I think, if anything, that hurt it. Because it made it feel separate from everything else when it should have just felt the same. And we should have seen the Cruiserweight stars interacting with everyone else on the roster. So if anything, I think that was a problem, a hindrance. But I've got an example here of WrestleMania 34. And no disrespect to these guys, but this is the match at WrestleMania 34 for the Cruiserweight Championship. We've got Cedric Alexander against Mustafa Ali. I don't know how much the fans would be excited about that match in 2022, let alone going back to 4 years ago. So my point is, where's the Rey Mysterio? Where's the Finn Balor? Where's the AJ Styles type superstars that really would have grabbed the attention? Again, for me, I would have Cruiserweight Championships closing cards, closing pay-per-views, treating it like the Universal and the WWE. I think this was on a pre-show. They just never seemed to go far enough with it. And how many of those smaller guys just did not get the opportunities that they deserved to break through? And it is a shame to look back and think on some of those names. At the time of recording this, Finn Balor has still only been Universal Champion for 24 hours. That is it. He's never had the WWE Championship, and he's been Universal Champion for 24 hours. He just cannot get past a Roman, past a Brock, just cannot get into that main event scene. This, a properly booked Cruiserweight division, would have completely changed all of that. Next up, we've got tag team wrestling. Tag team wrestling. Now, tag team wrestling is something Vince never cared about, but he did have a great tag team division in the late 80s, early 90s with Legion of Doom and Demolition and Killer Bees and Rockers and all of those. But, then it'll go kind of settle down. In the mid-90s, we didn't get that many great teams. We got teams, but I can't say we got great teams. End of the 90s, we get Edge and Christian and Dudley Boys, and so it kind of comes back again. So it kind of keeps coming back and then going away. It seems like he's interested in it, invests in it, and then loses interest and it dies, and then he'll get interest and it'll come back. But there's so many great teams that we've missed out on. This picture of the revival just looks weird now. This is FTR in AEW, and it just looks weird seeing them with WWE titles. This is what they wanted to do to them. They wanted to dress them up like that. Like, this is how Vince treats tag teams. And there's loads of examples of people in NXT that have come up that have struggled, like the Ascension that you can see on screen. They were a massive team in NXT. They got called up and they were just buried. And we've seen American Alpha, massive in NXT, got called up. They did win the championships, but they were very quickly disbanded. And so, they didn't stick around very long. Authors of Pain, they got called up. Just didn't really do much with them. The Vaudevillains, they were great in NXT. They got called up. Didn't really do much with them. Enzo and Cass, they get split up quite quick when they're on the main roster. So there's this long list of tag teams that just don't get treated right on the main roster. And a strong, vibrant tag division. We know how exciting tag wrestling can be. Look at the Usos. Look at the New Day. Look at some of your favourite tag teams. We know that it can be great. And think about all of that great tag team wrestling that we've missed out on. Next, we've got the NWO. NWO. Now, we spoke earlier about the Invasion and how there was no big names. Vince does get big names in 2002 with the NWO. He gets Hogan, Hall, and Nash. So surely now there's no way of messing it up. If the problem before was that you didn't have big names, well, now you've got them. Surely now you don't mess it up. It got messed up. And the reason why it got messed up was lots of different things, really. But I think the biggest reason is that Vince never really wanted them. They were not his creation. I think it's very hard for him to invest in something that he did not create. And so he wanted to actually bring them in, split them up, and create a new group that had a mixture of WWE stars and a mixture of NWO stars. And so kind of really, create this new team. And I think one of the bigger problems was that when this match happens, which is Hogan against The Rock, Hogan gets massively over with the fans. He is a babyface. And so he ends up leaving the NWO. And as soon as you take Hogan out, the whole thing falls apart. So, we do start to see a few things happen after that with the NWO. He brings in the likes of Shawn Michaels. He brings in the likes of Big Show, X-Pac. Some of this does make sense. But without Hogan, and I think without any really interesting creative, this thing is just doomed to fail. And what's crazy is I really think this could have been a vehicle for bringing in young talent. This could have been a brilliant place for the likes of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall to have been working with some young talent and use that NWO branding to really bring through the next generation. I mean, this is the same year that Brock arrives. Imagine Brock debuting as the newest member of the NWO. That could have been insane. That could have helped the NWO, and it would have been great for Brock as well. But obviously in 2003, that's where we're starting to see the likes of John Cena. Randy Orton is coming through at this time. So this could have been a great vehicle for bringing in that talent. And we only have to look at the Bullet Club to see how it could have lasted, because Bullet Club were heavily influenced by NWO. They started in 2013. They are still going now in 2022. So they've been around for 9 years. Whereas this version of the NWO, I think it lasts about 6 months. So another invasion, if you will, but another missed opportunity regarding WCW. Final one then. We've been going quite a while. We're already almost at the half-hour mark. Women's wrestling. We'll be quite quick on this, but WWE starts in the early 50s. It's part of the NWA. It goes its own way in the early 60s. And really, I don't think it's until 2015 that we really start getting behind women's wrestling. They definitely have moments. Wendi Richter in the 80s was a massive moment. They tried to make her as big as Hulk Hogan, but for various different reasons, it never worked, and the experiment was ended. And so was really women's wrestling for quite a while. There was women's wrestlers around as attractions, but there was no real division. And in the 90s as well, you know, this is one of my earliest memories. I used to love watching Alundra, Blayze, Bull Nakano, Bertha Faye, Luna Vachon, Sensational Sherry. Like, there were women around in the 90s, but again, I think it was due to budget cuts. The whole women's division is disbanded in the mid-90s. Again, you get to the end of the 90s, you've got Chyna, you've got Lita, you've got Trish in the early 2000s. You've certainly got people like Molly, Holly, Ivory. There's women around, but is there ever really a strong, vibrant division where women's wrestling, not bra and panty matches or a mixture, but proper women's storylines and wrestling, is there a period of time where that is a focus? For me, I don't think we get that until we get the women's revolution in 2015. This is just after that, I believe, but it gives you the picture an idea. I mean, 2015 is when we see Sasha, Charlotte, Becky, all arriving onto the main roster. The Bellas are obviously already there. Naomi and Tamina are already there. Paige is already there. But that is really the foundation for, you know, what was to follow. And then obviously we add in the likes of Alexa, Bayley, Asuka, and all the women that would follow to where we are now. Many of the very first matches for women happen after 2015, like the first Hell in a Cell, first Royal Rumble, first Money in a Bank, I think first Elimination Chamber. All of these firsts happen after 2015. So for me, how many great matches, great moments, great superstars did we miss out on before that? You know, where was the female Rock during the Attitude Era? Where was the female Shawn Michaels? Where was the female Hulk Hogan? I know it was meant to be Wendi Richter, but if it wasn't Wendi, I'm sure there were others. So I feel like there was a lot of women's wrestling that we've missed out on. And that, for me, is one of the biggest missed opportunities because I absolutely love women's wrestling. And that's it. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. This video definitely went longer than I was expecting. Lots of stuff in there, though. I'm sure you will agree. Hopefully you enjoyed it all the same. Thank you for sticking with such a long video. Did not intend for it to go that long, but hey, listen. I hope you enjoyed it all the same. Leave your suggestions down in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.